In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing the show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube.
Welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Nathan Seelove.
And I'm Michael Bloom.
And welcome back. We are back, baby, after a, let's see, how long has this hiatus been? Well, I guess I should know this pretty easily because we've been gone for as long as my daughter's been born, which is about 6 months. So after a 6-month hiatus, we are back, and I'm a dad.
A lot has changed. A
lot has changed. A lot has changed.
What do you think, dude? How's it? How do you like being a dad?
I gotta tell you, it is the most difficult job that I've ever loved.
Wait a second. That means you either don't love doing our podcast or you don't think it's that hard. Which is it, Nathan? Is a podcast easier than having a child?
Yeah.
Right,
It is a lot easier. In fact, I don't know if I can think of any job besides maybe being a rocket scientist that's harder than having a child, or maybe rocket scientists are like, you know, what their version of this isn't rocket science is this isn't parenthood.
Well, I'm glad that you know, are back with us in the land of the living and able to sleep and take care of your baby. And
I'd say land of the living is stretching it a bit because it's
all right.
sleep. I did not get hardly any sleep last night. So we'll see how this pod goes. So speaking of which, we're here to talk about politics.
Yes. Yes, we are.
So today, despite how excited I am to start doing the pod again, we have some fucking downers.
Yeah, dude, that's the thing. Like, a lot has happened in your life. Some has happened in my life. But boy,
yeah,
we were little summer children back in November.
Oh, God.
Donald Trump wasn't the nominee yet.
Yeah.
We were still shitting all over DeSantis. Now he's wiped from the face of the earth and just...
Where did DeSantis even go? I feel like he just got like Thanos snapped and out of existence.
Yeah, I think eventually the mechanism in his boots just chewed him up all the way.
Oh, you know what? People gave Ron DeSantis a hard time for being in those boots. I thought he looked fabulous.
Absolutely adorable. I feel like if he hadn't been such a hypocrite about things like that, people would have gone a lot easier on him.
Perhaps.
Yep.
So today we are going to talk about Gaza, and then we're going to talk about Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. Kind of also about Gaza, though.
Yeah.
Like basically, we're gonna have a discussion about how a lot of the policies that the Biden administration has been doing and a lot of the failed approaches on Gaza kind of influence our perspective on the election. Because on one hand, of course, you have like what very plausibly can be referred to as a genocide going on that the Biden administration is supporting. But we also have a fucking fascist who is running against him, who also enthusiastically supports that genocide. So we're going to discuss kind of how we can reconcile that and kind of what we believe we need to do from there. You know, what we think is the best move from there.
Yep.
So
it is the sequel to the Biden-Trump showdown, the lesser of two evils, once again.
Yes. It's the God. To think of, I mean, I always did think it was a lesser of two evils thing, but like the extent of which it is a lesser of two evils thing right now is just mind-boggling. God, remember when people thought that fucking Obama and Romney were the lesser of two evils? Like that was a lesser of two evils election?
Yeah. To be fair, Romney would have been a awful and, you know, like really corrupting president. But yeah, I do remember those quaint days.
And Obama was drone striking children. But like,
sure, yeah,
you know, God damn. All right, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Excited is not the right word that I would use for this, but
Yeah.
damn, I've been really wanting to talk about Gaza because
Yeah.
just so much more news has come out,
Hmm.
so many more details have come out, so much has happened. God, I
Yes.
listened to our podcasts like right before we left our
Hmm.
coverage on Gaza and us talking about the atrocities of Israel carrying out their bombardment campaign, and the
Yep.
casualties at that point was like 4,000, and
Yeah.
we were calling that an atrocity, which it was, but
Yeah.
holy shit, that was
Yeah.
just the
Let's.
fucking beginning.
Yeah. I mean, so I know we have listeners that prefer our podcast as like their, window into politics and news and interpretation and
Yeah,
stuff. So I think it's probably worth us taking a minute, turning back the clock, doing a little bit of a
yeah,
reset, like a coverage of, what's happened, what the inciting kind of incident of this proximate like conflict was, and go from there. Because I think it's worthwhile level
yeah,
setting on the drivers here and yeah and all that. So
yeah.
okay.
Before we start, I do just want
Hmm.
to give a disclaimer
Yeah.
or a caveat. I don't know what you would call it. That I feel like we always do need to give.
Hmm.
There are some dishonest actors that pretend that if you criticize the actions of the Israeli government, that equates to criticisms of the Jewish people,
Hmm.
and by extension, support for Hamas. So
Yeah.
before we get started, I want to make one thing clear. Anti Semitism is a fucking blight on the world.
Yeah.
It is a blight on the world, and it should be condemned in all of its forms.
Hmm.
Criticizing the Israeli government for actions committed against Palestinian civilians is not one of its forms.
Yes, exactly.
We strongly condemn anti Semitism, and anybody that takes the actions of the Israeli government and applies it to all the Jewish people in the world
Yeah.
is a jackass. Like
Totally.
is a bastard, is an anti-Semitic asshole,
Hmm.
and has no place in this discussion.
Yeah.
Like
I,
plain and
I
simple,
totally
plain
agree with that.
plain and simple.
Yeah.
Um, also, Hamas is a terrorist organization,
Yep.
and we both strongly condemn the actions that they committed on October 7th. It was
Hmm.
brutal. It was
Yep.
barbaric. It was terrorism. They are a group of terrorists, and we do not support them. And we would love to see the organization destroyed.
Yes. 100% on all counts. So let's talk about October 7th then.
Yes.
October 7th, Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that controls the Palestinian Authority, which is the governing body in Gaza, organized and coordinated an attack on Israel. This was a horrific attack on like Israeli soil. It incorporated, murder and acts of terror. The Israeli government estimates that about 1,200 Israelis were killed during this horrific attack. This included about 300 Israeli soldiers. Just to put it in a little bit of perspective, this makes this the deadliest attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And to put it in like a U.S. centric type perspective, as a percent of Israel's population, 1,200 people is about 12 9/11s.
Mm.
So this was not only horrific, not only an act of terror, not only awful, but like a incredibly impactful event for Jewish people everywhere to have an attack of this scale on their ethnicity, and also a nation that many people have deep ties to. Also, obviously, attack on a U.S. ally and a sovereign nation. And on top of all that, approximately 250 people were kidnapped by Hamas and were taken as hostages. So, following that, after just a couple of days, the Israeli government declared a siege on Gaza, where they shut off all electricity and import of food and fuel, and began to bombard the Gaza. From the start of this conflict until about a month ago, about 260 or so Israeli military have been killed, according to the Israeli government. Um, and so at the time of this, siege of Gaza, after a few days, they began to issue warnings that northern Gazans should start evacuating south to avoid their invasion, which covers about 1 million people who they were advising to flee to the southern part of Gaza. And they began a pretty comprehensive bombing campaign, including bombing refugee facilities and camps and hospitals. The Israeli government also launched at that time a ground invasion into Gaza as well. Ultimately, they have pushed south methodically over the last 6 or 7 months. And what we saw in just the first month was that, about 10,000 people in Gaza were killed. And we can talk about some of the more recent figures here, but we're talking about a huge scale invasion, which is somewhat indiscriminately bombing and killing innocent civilians, women, children, the young, the elderly. I mean, that's kind of what a bomb does, is it fucking takes out everything in its
And I wouldn't say
blast
somewhat
radius.
indiscriminate.
You're right.
I would say
It's been
more indiscriminate than not indiscriminate, looking at the numbers.
Yes, I would say that that's right. Especially, I mean, it's hard to bomb discriminately,
Yeah.
especially when you're
Yeah.
going after like an insurgent terrorist organization that like you can't take out without significant collateral damage.
Yeah.
And that's not to justify the collateral damage
Yeah.
in any way. So,
Yeah.
So this was all kind of carried out in kind of the name of protecting Israel, defeating Hamas, seemingly at any cost, and then also attempting to rescue the Israeli hostages that Hamas had taken. They, as part of this, have shut down all aid to the region. This has developed. Some aid has gotten in over time, but that has varied significantly and largely has been outside of the willing acceptance of the Israeli government. And at this point, still about 100 hostages remain in captivity. And from October 7th to now, about 35,000 total people have been killed in Gaza, with 75,000 people injured. And this is according to the Gazan Health Ministry. And so, not to compare losses here, but like we mentioned, like the October 7th attack was the equivalent of about 12 9/11s by population. By population, the 35,000 people killed in Gaza over the last 7 months is as if Gaza experienced 1,600 9/11s by population.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the numbers, because there's a lot of conflicting information. There's a lot of bullshit misinformation about the numbers. So let's set some things straight. So there are a few figures that I want to go over for you all and kind of say what level of credibility each of them have and what exactly they include. So the first one I want to give is the numbers from Israel themselves. So according to Benjamin Netanyahu, he claims, and this is as of May 13th, that so far there have been 14,000 Hamas combatants that were killed and 16,000 civilians who have been killed. So their own numbers show about 30,000 people and a little bit more of a 1-to-1 ratio. So by their own numbers, for every one combatant that is killed, a civilian is killed. All right? By their own numbers. By their own numbers, that is a fucking atrocity.
Yeah.
All right? That is a
great.
fucking
800 9/11s instead of 1600s.
Yeah. That is by their own admission. But here's the problem with that. Here's why that number is misleading. When they say 14,000 Hamas combatants have been killed, you know who they're counting as Hamas combatants? Military-aged men. As
Just
in
assuming...
all military-aged men.
Yeah.
That 14,000 civilian number only accounts for women and children. The reason why we know this is because that number is reflected to a little bit of a greater extent in the UN numbers.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the UN numbers, which by the way, the UN gets their numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry, which Michael talked about. And we'll talk a little bit about how credible these numbers are in a sec, but let me break these down for you. So according to the Gaza Health Ministry, which these are the official numbers that the United Nations is using, 34,735 people have died. Of them, 9,500 were women and 14,500 were children. So Netanyahu's number is lowballing it, to be clear.
Yeah.
That's how they're counting it to begin with. They're counting it as the combatants are military-aged men and the non-combatants are women and children, but they're lowballing it. That number is still lowballing it. So when you look at that, when you look at these numbers from the Gazan Health Ministry, this means that 52% of those killed have all been women and children. So all of them would be considered civilians in this case. But this number does not reflect how many of the men who have been killed are also civilians. Now,
Totally.
in terms of raw numbers, we can usually trust the Gaza Health Ministry. Now, you will hear propagandists say, well, but the Gaza Health Ministry is controlled by Hamas, so this is just a bunch of propaganda. You can't trust that. But here's a problem with that. Historically, it has actually been reliable.
Yeah.
Historically, previous and other conflicts, such as Operation Protective Edge, which I believe was in 2014, and various other conflicts that we've seen where there have been ramp-ups, the Gaza Health Ministry numbers have coincided with the official UN numbers after the fact.
Yeah.
Like the Gaza Health Ministry during it coincided with the UN numbers that came out after the fact. So it actually has historically been a reliable source of information. And we talked about that in a previous episode too.
Yeah. And there's a reason, there's reason to believe that this number might even be undercounting, because they are only counting people that have died in the hospital or people who have reported their family dying and have been able to provide identifying information for the individuals that have died.
Yeah.
So, not counting anyone undiscovered, not counting anyone who has passed away without, in the many buildings that have been, covered in rubble in the buildings that have been bombed. There's the potential for this to be an undercount, even though it is higher than what the Israeli government is reporting. The other thing is Jesus Christ, implied in the Israeli government's reporting is the belief that every male in Gaza is a terrorist.
Yeah. Every military-aged male.
Yeah.
And I'm glad Michael brought up the fact that this is probably also a low ball because it doesn't account for those. But there actually is a human rights organization called the Euro Med Monitor that does take those into account when giving their total number. And they also distinguish specifically between civilians and combatants. So let's look at their number. All right. And the Euro Med Monitor is a human rights organization that's actually based in Geneva. So
good conventions there, I hear. Yeah.
I hear, yeah. So according to the Euro Med Monitor, and this number is as of April 24th. So it's likely more so at this point. The Israeli army has killed 42,510 Palestinians, 38,621 of them were civilians.
Holy shit.
That is an over 90% civilian death rate.
Jesus fucking
Included
Christ.
Included in those is 10,091 women and 15,780 children.
Yeah. Jesus. And oh my God, that's fucking mind-blowing.
And also on top of that, that includes 137 journalists, 356 medical personnel, and 42 civil defense personnel. Based on these, based on this on these data, that brings the daily death toll, to 212 per day, which means 50 women per day and 79 children per day. Per day. 79 children per day.
Jesus. And that's the thing. The most conservative version of these numbers is an atrocity.
Yeah.
The middle version of these numbers is like appalling. And then the potentially accurate, like independently assessed version of these numbers is like absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, when 90% of your damage is collateral, you can't credibly be interpreted as trying to hit your target anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there's just there's no margin of like confidence that you can have that there's even a good faith attempt being made to avoid collateral damage.
Yeah. Like I'm glad you brought that up, because thus far the defense by the Israeli government has been, well, but we're just trying to target Hamas, and Hamas is using human shields. So like, and the reason why they're using all these people as human shields is so that they can then point to us and say, look, they bomb civilians, they're so terrible. And it's like, okay, but you fucking do the bombs anyway.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
you did bomb civilians.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about how stupid that is. Like, I'm pretty sure I've used examples like this before, but like if I like say 3 terrorists take over a school, and there's like 1,000 kids in there. All right. If the U.S. government decided, well, there's only one way to solve this problem, we got to take out them terrorists, and bombed the shit out of the school, killing the 3 terrorists, but also the 1,000 children, would you be okay with that? Like, would you seriously be okay with that?
Yeah.
If you would be okay with that, then what? Then like, I mean,
it's a great point. The bad guys shoot the hostage. That's like, I mean, that sounds overly simplistic, and it is, but like,
you're not the good guy if you like, and the fact that they're pretending like, oh, they're goading us into it. You're fucking doing it. Yeah. You're the one who's doing it. Like, and like they claim, oh, we take great lengths to prevent civilian casualties. Motherfucker, if the Euromed Monitor's numbers are accurate, which, given the fact that we know that at least over 50% are civilians, but again, that doesn't count combatant age males. Mm-hmm. The fact that this is an independent organization that does count some of those who are buried under the rubble that we haven't seen yet, then we're looking at over 90% civilian death rate. At best, you are the most fucking incompetent military on the goddamn planet.
Yeah.
At worst, you're genocidal.
Yeah.
Either way, nobody should be giving you weapons.
Yes.
Like, again, the best case interpretation is, oh, well, we just didn't mean to. We just didn't mean to do any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. That's the best case interpretation. In which case, giving them weapons would be the equivalent of, like you're at a party and your friend is drunk off his ass, and they're like, hey, could I borrow your car? And you're like, yeah, here, take the car keys. And your car, by the way, is a fucking tank.
Yeah.
You
not
wouldn't
cool to
do
bring
that.
to a party, by the way.
Not cool to bring to a party. Like, you wouldn't fucking do that.
Yeah.
Again, that's the example of, is this just an incompetent regime? But let's talk about the worst case scenario, which is that they're doing this on purpose. All right. They're having a reckless disregard for human life. That, based on what has been said and based on the actions, is undeniably the reality. All right. So here's just a few examples. So first off, Israel has attacked aid workers. Mm-hmm. All right. In fact, according to Human Rights Watch, there have actually been at least 8 strikes on aid worker convoys in Gaza since October 23rd. And each time, the aid workers specifically sent the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, specifically sent them their location to say, hey, we're going to be going through here. Here are our coordinates. Don't fucking bomb us. And they bombed them. All right? We're not Hamas. Don't bomb us. They fucking bombed them. All right? During these strikes, which, by the way, the Israeli authorities, they often say like, oh, well, we gave warnings. Warnings were not given. And those among them, the death toll is 31. 31 aid workers who sent their coordinates to the IDF, said, don't bomb us. We're going to be going here. We're aid workers. Were bombed without warning. I don't know how you can call that not intentional.
Yeah,
I mean, at this point, you probably shouldn't be sharing your coordinates with the fucking IDF, like, if they're doing this, because you're just telling them where you are so they can bomb you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. To your point, like, it's either malicious or incompetent, but the idea that it's incompetent is far-fetched. Like, the Israeli military is sophisticated and capable. It is one of the more, like, well-equipped militaries in the world, thanks to the United States. Like, these are not jabronis. These are effective, in many cases, professional soldiers. Like, the idea that it's just people doing an oopsie is not realistic.
Yeah. And so let's look at some more evidence for the idea that this is intentional. And a lot of these were actually brought up in the International Court of Justice case that South Africa brought against Israel, which, I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. But let's look at some of the actual comments made from higher up officials. So Benjamin Netanyahu in late October did a televised address in which he said, quote, "You must remember what Amalek has done to you." Now, this is a reference to the Bible where the Amalekites were basically persecutors of the Israelites. And there is a biblical commandment that basically says they must be destroyed. He's basically, quoting the Bible to say, these are people you must destroy, right? The defense minister, and I'm going to butcher some of these names, I apologize. 2 days after the Hamas attack, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that Israel was, quote, fighting human animals when announcing, and he said this while announcing the complete siege on Gaza, so referring to the people of Gaza as human animals. The Speaker of the Israeli Parliament, Nessim Vaturi, said that their one goal was to, quote, erase the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth. Israeli Heritage Minister Amichai Eliha, which, again, probably butchering these names, said that there were, quote, no uninvolved civilians in the territory, and he actually advocated for dropping a nuclear bomb on Gaza. So these are Israeli officials that are basically directly using genocidal rhetoric. Like, these aren't just fringe people. These are people in the Israeli government. They're using genocidal rhetoric to refer to the people of Gaza, not just Hamas, but the people of Gaza.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that International Court of Justice ruling, or what decision they made, what preliminary decision that they made, because there's been a little bit of misreporting about this. So the wording of what they actually said that was catching a lot of attention, they said, quote, in the court's view, the facts and circumstances are sufficient to conclude that at least some of the rights claimed by South Africa and for which it is seeking protection are plausible. Now, a lot of people took that and said that that was an official ruling that, yes, there is a genocide, that the International Court of Justice said that, yes, there is a genocide happening. Later, it was clarified by one of the judges on the panel during an interview that, quote, it did not decide, and this is something where I'm correcting what's often said in the media, that the claim of genocide was plausible. It did emphasize in the order that there is a risk of irreparable harm to the Palestinian right to be protected from genocide. So basically what they're saying is that there is enough evidence to suggest that the right of Palestinians to not be genocided could be under threat, and that it's plausible to say that. They did, like I said, they stopped short of saying that it was a straight up genocide, but that's the type of ultimate decision that does take years to come to. All
Yeah.
right. So this right here is probably the most damning of a conclusion for this preliminary hearing that they
Hmm.
could have made, uh, saying that there is a plausible possibility that their rights regarding protections from genocide are being violated and could be harmed irreparably. So that's why I don't think that it's too much of a stretch to go ahead and call it genocide, especially when you take the words of actual Israeli officials into account. When you look at the death toll and look at the numbers
Yeah.
and look at the disregard for human life.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And from another front as well, like, let's take their stated goal on its face. Their stated goal is to like protect Israel, defeat Hamas, and reclaim hostages, right? At this point, where I guess they are mainly focused on defeating Hamas, eradicating Hamas from the region, right? Multiple experts from outside and inside Israel have emphasized that this is fundamentally not a military objective, not a militarily possible objective. And this has started to be borne out on the ground where the fighting is happening. Oh, so one Israeli Defense Force chief of staff, right, was quoted saying, as long as there is no political move that will bring forth a governing body other than Hamas in the Strip, we will have to operate again and again there and in other places to dismantle the Hamas infrastructure. It will be a Sisyphean task. Basically acknowledging that, like, until we present an actual fundamental solution, we're just going to be having to operate militarily in this region forever. And Danny Orbach, a military historian at Hebrew University of Jerusalem, said, quote, the Israeli strategy is not a good one. The tactic of endlessly clearing and degrading Hamas capabilities while avoiding responsibility for of governing Gaza will not work. And U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has repeatedly made this point that, like, Israel can't achieve this particular objective. And we're starting to see it, right? As they've started their campaign in the north of Gaza and have moved steadily south, right? And now they're having to move back north in order to re-clear the area where Hamas has come back in, because Hamas is a terrorist organization, right, that will attract like new radical members when there is a foreign force controlling and militarily present and fucking killing their families. Like, the idea that we're able to just clear out this army or whatever and then free Palestine from this like force is not realistic, right? That's
Yeah.
not how it operates in the region.
Yeah.
And so the question then becomes, to your point, Nathan, I think it's the thing that undergirds all of this is this deep question: what is the point here? What is the objective? What are they actually planning to accomplish? And what the fuck is the end game?
Yeah.
When will they stop bombing civilians? Like that, and no one has been able to answer this question. And yet, we continue to send them offensive military weapons. And like that is one of the things that's most mind-blowing to me. Like, so far, the Israeli forces in the region have perpetrated 1,600 9/11s in response to 12 9/11s. Let's be clear. Like, this is a horrible situation initiated by a terrorist organization on Israel, but we're seeing the Israeli government kill tens of thousands of people without regard for the lives of civilians or innocents or women and children. And our response, in short, in best case scenario, in an attempt to do diplomacy, has been to just send them as much military aid as they could possibly ask for. And not just in the form of like defensive like Iron Dome supplies, which we like provide in on an ongoing basis. Not just in like the form of like actually defending their country, which is, you know, under threat. It's under threat from Hamas. The escalating tensions in the region have put it under threat from Iran. But we're talking like we've talked about sending planes, we've sent tanks and rockets. Like these are offensive weapons that like people in Gaza are being killed with munitions that say United States of America. And like, how is it possible that we have still not learned this lesson after like doing this so many fucking times throughout history and just sending them aid without preconditions, right? Even without the requirement that they tell us how their exit strategy, like nothing.
Yeah.
It's fucking crazy. Like, Israel has a right to defend itself. If defense means defeating Hamas, can this be accomplished via invasion or civilian bombings? Probably not. Like, Israel has a right to pursue and reclaim their hostages. But are bombing campaigns that are indiscriminate on refugee camps and hospitals the way that that's going to be accomplished? Probably not. Israel has a right to defend itself and pursue its hostages and defeat Hamas. But like, is an Israeli life worth more than a Palestinian one? Like, how could it ever be possible that the militarily possible objectives in this situation could outweigh the death toll of 35,000 people, at least half of whom are women and children and civilians? How could that possibly be justified by the objective here?
Yeah.
Like, how could we ever justify that amount of collateral damage?
And on top of that, not only is it something that's not going to be accomplished, this is the best way of actually creating more people in Hamas.
Yeah.
This is a lesson that the United States learned, at least should have learned, when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. The reason why ISIS was created was in response to us invading the Middle East.
Yeah.
And now I want to be clear about something. On a micro level, I don't care what happened in your life. I don't care like how many family members you lost. If you become a terrorist and start targeting other civilians, fuck you. All right. I don't care about your background. All right. You're morally reprehensible. There's no justification. There's no justification. But on the macro level, we do know that radicalization does not happen in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Radicalization happens as a response to horrors, right? Because violence begets violence. The reason why ISIS was created was because hundreds of thousands were civilians were killed by the United States government, and that's the type of shit that radicalizes people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there is likely going to be an entire generation of people in Palestine, in Gaza, that watched their family, their brothers, their sisters, their mothers, their aunts, their uncles get bombed into oblivion before their very eyes. And when they grow up, they're going to remember that shit.
Yeah.
And I hope that most of these people don't become Hamas, but you're going to increase Hamas's membership by doing this. Mm-hmm. All right? That's just like historically what happens. We know that that's what happens. That's how you radicalize people. So you are making the problem actively worse. The final point that I want to make is that the response that someone might give to people like Michael and me who criticize the Israeli government, say like, stop fucking doing this, stop fucking bombing civilians, is, but what about the historical context of the region, right? There's historical context that you just don't understand. And also, like, what solution would you recommend? Mm-hmm. What solution would you recommend? Now, people that say there's a lot of historical context that I think that the people that are defending Israel don't actually understand. But we don't need to get into that right now, because you don't need to understand the historical context of anything to be able to say that bombing children into oblivion is wrong. All right? There is no historical context that is going to justify that. I actually fucking saw some idiot on Facebook who was arguing about what happened in Israel. And he was talking about some shit that happened in the 1950s. He's like, that's why I have no sympathy for the pro-Palestinian position. And it's like, what the fuck? People weren't even fucking alive back then.
Yeah.
Most
You know who definitely wasn't alive back then? A child.
Yeah. Yeah. Hell, even when people bring up the fact that Hamas came to power through a democratic election, supposed democratic election in, I believe it was 2003, 2004, half of the people in Gaza are children under the age of 15.
Yeah.
They weren't even alive. And even if a lot of the children that were alive, they were fucking kids.
Mm-hmm.
They were kids. All right? So no historical context makes bombing kids okay. And to the other point, well, what would your solution be? The right response to that doesn't need to be, well, let me give you an entire synopsis of the Middle East. The correct response to that is just not this.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Not this.
There are really hard questions at play.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Like, these issues are complex and nuanced, and they are both national and personal, and there's a lot going on here. Bombing indiscriminately women and children is not one of the hard questions.
Yeah. There's no nuance there. You don't need any nuance. So after that depressing segment, it's time for one of our more lighthearted segments, Tips for Good. So, Michael, why do we do Tips for Good every week?
Nathan, I'm so glad you asked. The real answer is that if you're happy and you know it, you clap your hands. That's actually the only verse of that song that I know. Is there like a stomp your feet? Is there like a rub your belly one too?
Something like that. Well, I mean, you kind of just make things up as you go along.
Oh,
also,
great.
Notice that neither Michael nor I clapped our hands.
No, I mean, we just did a really sad segment. But
yeah, we did.
Hey, maybe after this Tips for Good, we'll be clapping, because the thing about Tips for Good is that in addition to, it being a cause to clap your hands, it's, the whole goal is to make the world a little bit of a better place.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. There we
That's
go.
why we do Tips for Good.
Because it makes you clap your hands. And
it makes the world a better place. That's the big thing.
I think it's the hands clapping is it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. So Nathan, then if it's really about clapping your hands, what is our tip for good today?
Our tip for good today is specifically targeted towards those of you that might own a pair of testicles.
Oh.
And that
is
a
single testicle.
Or a single testicle.
The uniballers.
Yep. And that is about the importance of regular checks.
Yep.
Now, I believe on this podcast I have mentioned several times that I am a cancer survivor. I have never directly said what type of cancer that is, but now I'm going to, because it's not something that I believe should be stigmatized.
Mm-hmm.
I am a survivor of testicular cancer. I discovered a lump about a little over 2 years ago. I had surgery to have one of my testicles removed because of it. And because I acted so fast as soon as I found the lump, they got into the ultrasound, they diagnosed it, they got me into surgery. The entire process was maybe 3 weeks, which is really quick.
That's fast.
Because of that, I have officially passed the 2-year mark. And the cancer has not come back. And after the 2-year mark, the chances of it coming back reduced drastically.
That's
and
awesome,
now I only have to go
Congrats.
in for checkups every 6 months instead of every 3 months.
Wow, that's awesome.
Because my chances have really reduced. But the reason why they got that point to begin with is because I caught it so early.
Yeah.
So I know that so like regular checks to make sure that there's no lump, and if there is a lump, getting it looked at as soon as possible. And
Yeah.
if you do end up having testicular cancer, there's no shame in that.
Yeah, of course.
There's no shame in undergoing surgery. There's no shame in having only one testicle, or having no testicles.
Yeah.
Right? There's no shame in any of that. Your life is more important.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
100%. Do the checks. They're fast. They're easy. They're the right kind of thing to incorporate into your everyday routine. And it could absolutely save your own life. And, no offense, but no one else is going to do it for you. So,
and that's tips for good.
So for our next segment, we are talking about Trump versus Biden. And boy, I hope this doesn't become something that we have to talk about all the time. But Jesus Christ, we're in another presidential election year, staring down the barrel of a rematch. And as much as I want to roll my eyes and be exhausted and be frustrated with that, can't do any of that. It really fucking matters a lot. And, a lot of people are talking about trivial shit. Right? A lot of people are talking about, honestly, how much Biden has done. And in this instance, that's pretty trivial. Like, people are talking about his age. That couldn't, in this instance, pretty trivial. If he were, if he, if there was another good alternative, not so trivial. But, like, given where we stand today, honestly, his record, which is mixed, his age, which is old, are not nearly the most important things.
Yeah.
And so really we should be thinking about what will the next 4 years look like under each one of these options. Because you can't be motivated or demotivated by what we have been seeing, because this has to be a vote for the future. And and we're in a relatively unique position of being able to make the choice between two people who have been president.
Yeah.
So we can learn about what they're going to do from their past, but Jesus Christ, we have to prevent fucking Donald Trump from becoming president.
Yeah. Now, before we get specifically into that aspect of it, I think that we do need to spend some time talking about why this gets more complicated on a moral level when thinking about Biden.
Yeah.
Because the fact of the matter is, he is aiding and abetting a genocide right now. And, you can talk about how he was, in a lot of ways, he was an imperfect corporatist. He didn't go as far on some things than we wanted him to. And that was my big concern about him when he first became president, like that he's not going to go as far. And there were some times in which he basically demonstrated that, like when he went from "you'll get $2,000 checks" to "I'll send you $600 checks." Or, all the times that Build Back Better got reduced and reduced and reduced and reduced and eventually became the Inflation Reduction Act, which, the Inflation Reduction Act was great, but it was tiny compared to what the original proposal was.
Yeah.
The fact that he completely abandoned healthcare.
Oh,
like
my God.
those are
instantly.
Those are the types of things that you acknowledge as terrible, as shitty.
Yeah.
But like you also acknowledge, but Trump, like but Trump.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like Trump is going to do worse than nothing for healthcare. He's going to actively try to take your healthcare away. And we know he's going to do that because he fucking tried to do it in his first administration. All right. Biden, he created a corporate minimum tax rate. Trump reduced the corporate tax rate. So when we're talking about Biden versus Trump, when looking at specifically those differences, the calculus really does come down to a pretty easy choice.
Yeah.
But the problem is, when you include the atrocities that are being actively supported by the Biden administration into the calculus, it becomes more difficult.
Yeah.
Because, one of the, I saw there's this politician in Michigan that did an interview with Mehdi Hassan, and he was basically saying, like, you can say, well, but Trump's going to be worse on Palestine. But I talk to families who say, like, I just lost like 10 family members in Gaza this week because of the weapons that Biden keeps sending them. I mean, you can't really tell a person like that, oh, but it would be worse under Trump. Your relatives would be even more dead under Trump.
Sure.
Because you don't get much worse than that.
Yeah.
So I think that we do need to acknowledge the fact that Joe Biden, in his role as president, has been complicit in war crimes, has absolutely been complicit in war crimes. And in fact, he's even gone around Congress. He's even bypassed Congress on at least 2 separate occasions since October 7th to send millions of dollars in weapons to Israel. All right. There was a $147 million sale in late December. In early December, there was another one that was about $100 million. And these were both emergency packages that he bypassed Congress in order to send. Those are weapons that are being used to bomb children.
Yeah.
There is the aid package that Congress just approved that he could veto, and the TikTok ban, which, by the way, real quick, the TikTok ban, I know that might not sound relevant. The reason why it's relevant is because like, this isn't the first time they've tried to do a TikTok ban. The first time it didn't get traction. This time, the only reason why it got traction is because the general consensus on TikTok is against the war. And that's not me being conspiratorial. This is a thing that some of the senators, including Mitt Romney, have actually said out loud. Like, Mitt Romney, in a discussion with Anthony Blinken, straight up said, the reason why we were able to get support for this is because of all the pro-Palestinian content on TikTok.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Banning free speech in order to silence protest against the genocide. Like, you can't just be, it's not even just that you disagree with people on genocide. You have to silence their voices on genocide. All right? On top of that, the response to college campus protests, which, by the way, let's talk about the college campus protests for a second. This is something that the media has thrown this massive fit over, saying, look at all this violence and destruction and horror on college campuses. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, they did a study, they did an analysis of 553 campus protest demonstrations between April 18th and May 3rd, and they found that 97% of them stayed peaceful. 97% of them. They found fewer than 20 which resulted in violence or property damage, although they did find 70 instances of forceful police intervention, which, by the way, of the 3% that did get violent, they only got violent when the police came in. All right, the police actually escalated the situation.
Yeah.
And what does Biden say? What does Biden say about this? He says, quote, "Dissent must never lead to disorder." Counterpoint, it absolutely fucking does. Like, that's a crazy sentiment. Now, if it was, dissent must never lead to violence, I'd agree with that.
Different.
I would absolutely agree with that.
Yep.
But dissent must never lead to disorder. Have you read history at all?
I mean,
Susan B. Anthony was arrested protesting for suffrage. Yeah, you lived most of this shit. Susan B. Anthony was arrested protesting for suffrage. MLK was arrested on several occasions. Sit-ins, civil disobedience, brought us the Civil Rights Act. Lesser known thing, in order to pass the Americans with Disabilities Act, disability activists did what's referred to as the Capitol crawl, where a bunch of disabled people in wheelchairs forced themselves out of their wheelchair and crawled up the steps of the Capitol.
Jesus.
That's disorder.
Yeah.
That sure as shit is disorder.
Yeah.
And it got us the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that violence is ever okay. Violence is not okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
But a certain level of disorder and civil disobedience is something that has been used time and time again by
It's
various different
critical.
movements. Like
It
it's
is.
critical,
Yeah.
especially in response to this, in response to the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world. Like, how do you not get that?
Yeah. Seriously. And you wonder, like, okay, well, if these have all been peaceful and these students are just protesting, like, why why has it been a problem? Why is it getting so much attention? Why is Biden even talking about it? Why is, like, why is the media having such a strong, especially conservative media, have such a strong backlash? And there's a simple answer. Approximately 94% of these protests are in support of Palestinians.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in instances where police have been involved, when there aren't counter protesters, so police are more likely to get involved when there are counter protesters. But when there aren't counter protesters and the police get involved, they're involved 5.5 times more often if the protest is pro-Palestinian than if
Yeah.
it is pro-Israel.
Yeah. There was and also let's understand that sometimes when violence does happen, it's not necessarily the pro-Palestinian people that started the violence. Oftentimes it is actually the counter protesters.
Mm-hmm.
This actually happened on my campus where there is a pro-Palestinian occupation of where they set up tents and stuff on the quad, and a bunch of frat dudes came with these pool noodle swords. Initially, they were pretending to LARP, and then they just started attacking the protesters. They were shouting racial slurs, ableist slurs, homophobic slurs. That's what happened on my campus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, that doesn't necessarily represent all campuses, but all of this descents into violence that the media wants you to believe is happening on college campuses is just not accurate. Now, to be
Yeah.
clear, to reiterate something, to the extent that there is anybody who is a part of these protests who say anti-Semitic things, who
Yeah.
intimidate Jewish students, that must be condemned.
Mm-hmm.
That must be condemned. That is absolutely unacceptable. All right. And as a professor, I do feel a deep feeling of protectiveness towards my students. All right. And I don't want any of them, regardless of their identity, to feel unsafe on campus.
Mm-hmm.
So to the extent that that does happen, we condemn that in the strongest terms. But of course, I also feel like I have a responsibility to speak up, because this is something that affects a lot of my Arabic students as well,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a rise of anti-Arabic sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
So anti-Semitic sentiment and anti-Arabic sentiment need to be fought against on campus, on college
Mm-hmm.
campuses.
Yeah.
And wagging your finger at your base and not listening to them, and then banning their favorite fucking app
To prevent them from talking to each other about
is
it.
how you lose the election.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to Biden versus Trump, because Biden, like, I feel like there are a lot of people that will just say that genocide is a bridge too far and they cannot support Biden. And you know what? I don't blame them.
Yeah.
I don't blame them, and I'm not going to try to voter shame you into
Mm-hmm.
doing, like, into changing your mind. All
Yeah,
I can do is
especially-
justify my own actions.
Yeah, especially to your point. If you've got family that has been
Yeah.
killed in Palestine, they're not dying anymore because Donald Trump is president and is going to
Yeah.
make it worse.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. That is. Yeah. For convincible people, we should try to convince them that Trump is worse.
Yeah.
Yes, he is. But no shame here
Yeah.
for abstaining. I voted uncommitted for Biden. I mean, I know that's a symbolic thing,
I
because that was the choice here, and definitely symbolic, but it was the symbol that I could send.
I voted for Marianne Williamson.
Whoa.
I voted for Marianne fucking Williamson, because in Virginia you couldn't vote uncommitted. You couldn't even
Mhm.
write in. I was actually planning on writing in Rashida Tlaib, And I was not allowed to do that.
Wow.
The primary did not permit me to do that. So the three choices on the ballot were Dean Phillips, who is also terrible on Gaza,
Yeah.
Joe Biden, and Marianne Williamson. And Marianne
Mhm.
Williamson was the only person who was calling for an end to aid to Israel, like in response to the slaughter. And I was like, in a primary, that's all I can do.
Yes. Yep. Totally. And in a general,
Yeah.
gotta fucking get in line.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about Trump, because I think that it's important to note that as horrible as Biden is on Israel, it is possible to convince him to not be as shitty.
Yes.
It is possible to. He is shameable.
Yes.
That is the
totally.
thing. He is potentially shameable.
Yeah.
And we know that because he actually did cut off some weapons. Now, the media overhyped this. It was actually, it was just a few shipments, and then the next day he approved like a bunch of other tanks to them. So it was just like one level of shipments that he froze in response to the invasion of Rafah.
Sure.
But the thing is, that is the type of shit that Trump would never do.
Yeah, exactly.
You know-
With Biden, we get option value. We get the
Yeah.
potential for things to be different. With
Yeah.
Trump, especially in a second term, which we can talk through, there's no shaming, there's no convincing, there's no managing. He will fill every rank in his administration with people that will fall in line and not bother him too much and do exactly what he says. And so every whim of his, including some of the heinous things he said about Israel, will become our policy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, Trump is pretending that Biden is even further than Michael and me on the issue of Israel.
Yeah.
Because he's basically accused him of helping Hamas, of abandoning Israel. And he even said to Israel, when he was asked about this, he said, quote, "You've got to get it over with. You've got to get back to normalcy. And I'm not even sure that I'm loving the way they're doing it, because you've got to have victory. You've got to have victory. And it's taking a long time."
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. Okay, let's put that in context. We don't know what victory is, neither does Israel. Doing it quickly, like literally the only thing he could be talking about is like even larger scale bombings, even more people dead, even more indiscriminate killing. Because there's like the only victory he could be talking about is like essentially just total annihilation.
Yeah. Like he said, they've got to finish what they've started. They've got to finish it, and we have to get back on with life. Now, he does say in his favor, he does say get it over with fast, because we have to, get back to normalcy and peace. So like there is some plausible deniability there that he might be saying stop, but the thing is he doesn't. But the thing is,
said get it over with faster.
Yeah. And also when Biden said, "All right, I'm going to have this tiny little condition for Israel," Trump goes in and says, "Oh, he's abandoned Israel."
Yeah, totally.
So like, you have to judge Trump based on his reaction to policies, so that you know what type of difference, like whether or not Trump would be different in terms of his policies. And what you can basically extrapolate from that is that Trump would have even less conditions.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
He wouldn't do the finger wagging. He would not be persuadable. He would give Israel a green light to kill as many civilians as possible. And his concern, by the way, is not the civilian casualties, it's PR.
Yeah, exactly.
He directly said that. He said, quote, "Israel is absolutely losing the PR war." Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah.
How
seriously.
psychotic do you have to be for that to be your problem with Israel? They're not losing the PR war, like, because you like, what the fuck type of PR team?
Yeah, you can't win this PR war.
Yeah, you can't win a PR war when you're committing a fucking slaughter.
Yeah, and the other thing, like, and this is maybe a small point relative to that one, but like the fact that we've got to fucking, imply and try to tool out exactly what Trump's point is on the major foreign policy issue that our country is kind of facing at this point is crazy. It's just another reason to recognize that he is a totally unserious and unsophisticated leader in general, because it's like, you should be telling people what you think about one of the more important like foreign policy decisions that is happening right now. As voters,
Yeah.
we should not be having to fucking guess.
Yeah.
And the fact that all of the guessing like leads to like ramping up of and escalation of killing in Gaza
Yeah.
is obviously a
Well,
problem as well.
and we don't even really need to guess because, the people that are on the side of stop sending weapons to Israel would be the
Yep.
protesters. Here's what Trump has had to say about the protesters. Quote, remove the encampments immediately, vanquish the radicals, and take back our campuses for all of the normal students who want a safe place to learn. The radical extremists and far left agitators are terrorizing college campuses, as you possibly noticed, and Biden's nowhere to be found, which, Biden is where to be found. He's wagging his finger
on the
but
backside.
like if you believe that not only you not only disagree with these protesters, you think they should be removed, they should be vanquished. Like, they don't even have not only do you disagree with them, they don't even have the right to say that they disagree with you.
Yeah.
And you think that I mean, I don't know how else you can interpret that, as I would do basically what Biden is doing, but with even less safeguards. And not only that, but I would be a fucking authoritarian when it comes to protesting.
Yeah.
And we know that he is an authoritarian when it comes to protesting because he fucking gassed protesters so that he could do a photo shoot with a Bible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I think one of the things that I've been, noticing, and this is, been called out pretty regularly in the reporting as well, as we've been paying attention to Trump's kind of campaign for a second term, is that it seems like he's going to be better at the shit that he wants to do in a second term. And that shit is all like dictatorial and like authoritarian and democracy destroying. Like, it's really important that we pay attention to this because we have a track record here, and then we have him saying the lessons that he learned to do all that shit more effectively. We cannot forget that this dude like believes that during his presidency he had total authority to do whatever he wanted, and that he was immune from the criminal process altogether, and he's just entitled to defy the law and Congress and judges, and he can pardon himself, and that there is basically nothing that can touch him. And this belief largely led him to incite a fucking insurrection to take over the government. And we know that he has this belief because he has argued it as part of his defense in a number of criminal proceedings, right? He argued just a few weeks ago. He made his attorneys made the actual legal claim that he was entitled for immunity for criminal misconduct, even up to, and this is something that they specifically said, even up to killing a political rival.
Which, I mean, imagine how stupid you have to be when your current political rival is the current president. Like, how fucking stupid do you have to be to make that argument right now?
Well, that's the thing. It's always been the thing, is that he is dependent on being more depraved and deranged than others, being willing to go further than other people. So the fact that he believes this and has argued it in court, the fact that he has said, quote, now if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That will be the least of it.
Yeah.
Like, and so maybe this is rhetoric, right? Maybe this is just him arguing in front of the Supreme Court. Maybe this is just, him saying he's going to be a dictator on day one. Maybe this is all just rhetoric. Except, like, one of the lessons that he clearly learned, right, and that and the super conservative MAGA people learned from 2020 was that you have to get the machinery of government to support what you want to accomplish, right? You've got to get local and state governments to help support your election fraud claims so that you can recount and overturn elections at the state level. And importantly, Trump and the Heritage Foundation are developing a plan, or Trump's not developing a plan, he's receiving a plan that would enable him to do something similar in the federal government. So this is referring to like Project 2025, which is basically a plan to dismantle the deep state. And what it actually is just destroying any possibility of the federal government to function in any way independently from the executive, which is very problematic. This is very scary. So this is an extension essentially of an executive order that he put in place called Schedule F. And Trump actually put this executive order in place just before he left office, and then Biden rolled it back. But basically, it would dramatically increase the number of federal employees that are designated as political appointees. So today, about 4,000 federal employees are designated political appointees, and this means that they typically change with each president. You know, these are the heads of these different organizations and leaders and stuff like that, the kinds of things that will help set your policy, right? He wants to sweep away civil service protections, which protect people that are professional, career federal employees, to remove their protections, which have been in place for 140 years, to prevent them from becoming politicized, so that he can make pretty much every single branch, hundreds of thousands of positions, political appointees and fireable at will by the president. So he can basically take the entire federal government and turn it into a bunch of his personal lackeys, which maybe that doesn't sound too scary to you. It sounds terrifying to me, but maybe you're thinking, hey, well, but if the people at the heads of these organizations are political appointees, doesn't that mean that the organizations just follow suit? Not really. I mean, to some degree, they will follow the political direction, of course, but they also have skills. They know how to do their fucking jobs. They know how to actually get things done in the government and who to work with. Replacing these people with lackeys will cause the government to grind to a halt, and the only thing it will be in service of is Trump's personal ego, his personal vendettas, anything that he particularly wants to do at the time. This will take our federal government and make it entirely, exclusively the tool of the executive. And that's terrifying because the government does a lot of really important shit and wields a tremendous amount of power, and the thing that saved us from an even worse Trump first term were people, well, aside from his incompetence, which is key, but aside from his incompetence were sometimes people in the right spots gumming up the works in the right ways. And being able to just totally turn over the government, being able to corruptly appoint people to all kinds of jobs. This is the stuff of banana republics. This is not the stuff of functioning democracies.
Yeah. So when we talk about this election, and when we criticize Biden for shit, a huge part of it is that this election is too important to be lost.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, things are not looking good. So according to Real Clear Politics, the average polling in the key battleground states in Arizona has Trump up by 5.2 points. In Georgia, it has Trump up by 4.6 points. In Michigan, it has Trump up by 0.8 points. In Nevada, it has Trump up by 6.2 points. In North Carolina, it has Trump up by 5.4 points. In Pennsylvania, it has Trump up by 2.0 points. And in Wisconsin, it has Trump up by 0.6 points. Every single one of those states, except for North Carolina, were won by Biden in 2020. Every single one of them. Donald Trump has 90 criminal charges against him.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah. He's
You know,
barely campaigning. He's spending all his fucking time in courtrooms, and all his money, importantly, in courtrooms.
yeah, like 1 million people died of COVID under his watch.
Mm-hmm.
All right? His biggest legislative achievement was a massive tax cut for the rich, where 80% of all benefits will go to the top 1% after 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
He was this constant barrage of bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he almost got us into World War III because on a whim he decided to assassinate Soleimani. Like, this guy is a fucking buffoon. This should be an easy election for Biden, and he's blowing it. He's blowing it. So we criticize him not because, we're trying to say like, oh, you all should not vote for Biden so you can punish him. We don't give a fuck about punishing people.
No, we do
We
not.
care about the policies.
Yeah.
All right? And if you want Trump to win, Biden, Joe, if you want Trump to win, keep doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
All right? Keep wagging your hand at the young people that make up your base. Ban their favorite social media app. Give up on healthcare. Keep doing that shit, because you're going to lose.
Yeah.
Like, just God damn it. Imagine blowing an election because you are taking a principled stance in favor of genocide. Imagine that. Imagine that being the hill that you're dying on. Bro, get your shit together. Trump is too fucking dangerous to have in the White House.
To be fair, given Biden's age, any hill is a hill that he dies on.
Ouch. Ouch.
And now it's time for one of our favorite segments, the D-Bag Award. So Nathan, what's a D-Bag?
Well, Michael, the D-Bag Award.
I know. You fill it with water, you shove it up your vagina.
No.
Oh, wait, I've heard of this. This isn't a douchebag. This is a Dershowitz bag.
There you go. It's a Dershowitz bag. It's a Dershowitz bag. Obviously, because when I think D-bag, I think Alan Dershowitz.
Alan Dershowitz. Yes.
Yeah. And this is an award that we give out that is to honor individuals that make just the stupidest fucking self-defeating arguments. Oftentimes they deliver it very confidently and they don't realize like, oh, I sound like a buffoon.
Yeah,
I
to
sound
Congress,
like a dunce.
for example, sometimes they do this.
Yeah. It's named after Alan Dershowitz for that fateful time that he stood in front of the U.S. Congress to proclaim that Donald Trump could not have possibly done anything that rose to the level of impeachment when he pressured Ukraine to help him to help him in an election, to target an investigation into his political opponent, because he believed it was in the best interest for him to win that election. Classic.
Chef's kiss.
Chef's kiss.
So
Chef's
Nathan,
kiss.
what could possibly rise to the level of a D-Bag Award? I mean, that's pretty incredible.
It is a prestigious award, but we have a very worthy recipient this week.
No kidding.
It's our favorite Southern belle, Lindsey Graham.
Oh my God, Lindsey.
Lindsey, come on down.
Oh my God, this is exciting. I think he's been an asshat a few times. I don't know that he's ever been a D-Bag. Well,
I mean,
sorry, I don't know that he's ever received a D-Bag. He's always been a D-Bag.
Yeah.
So what did he do this time to get on our show and win this prestigious award?
So there is a method of argumentation that I actually teach my students, which is called reasoning by analogy.
Okay.
Now, the way that it works is that you take an example of something that is, that people already have a fairly good idea how they feel about. There's kind of like a universal agreement on it. And you compare that to something that there might be less agreement on. And the idea is you want to use the agreement on the first thing to make a point about the second thing. Now, dependent on that first thing, the thing that you are doing an analogy, that you are using for the analogy, one thing that is dependent is that it should be very clear to any reasonable person that that makes the point that you want it to make. So with that in mind, let's see how Lindsey Graham uses the method of reasoning by analogy. So he was on NBC's Meet the Press talking about the Israel-Gaza situation, and he said, quote, "When we faced destruction as a nation after Pearl Harbor fighting the Germans, we decided to end the war by bombing Hiroshima, Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. That was the right choice. Give Israel the bombs they need to end the war they can't afford to lose and work with them to minimize casualties. Why was it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay to do that? I thought it was okay. To Israel, do whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state. Whatever you have to do."
Wow.
Holy shit.
Oh,
A
man.
U.S.
Yep.
senator is calling for nuking Gaza.
Yep.
A U.S. senator.
Yep. And his justification is, well, when we did it before, it was awesome.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Everybody agrees that when we killed almost 300,000 innocent civilians, that was okay.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if we say that it's not okay to kill civilians now, then that means it's never okay to kill civilians. And pretty soon, you're going to have a war with no civilians being killed. We're going to have to question whether we go into a war because it might kill civilians. He's so close. He's so close.
Yeah, I feel like it's pretty close. Yeah.
He's so close.
Wow.
Jesus Christ. So, hey, Lindsay, you thought it was okay. Simple answer. No, it wasn't. It wasn't
exactly.
okay.
If
it wasn't
was okay
fucking
then,
okay.
then it's okay now. Well, what if it wasn't okay then?
Yeah,
Then
what if it
not
was
okay now? Yeah.
Like, look, I honestly, there is historical debate as to whether or not it was necessary. You know, there's a lot of historians that actually argue that the reason why we dropped the bombs was not because we thought it was going to help us end the war, that we were already pretty much heading there anyway, that it was to send a message to Russia that, hey, we have these fucking bombs and we're not afraid to use them.
And that's the thing. It's a counterfactual. It's impossible to know exactly what would have unfurled as a result.
Yeah, but we know what unfurled, and what unfurled is that we killed almost 300,000 civilians, around 300,000 civilians, purposely targeted civilians, which we have a word for that. It's terrorism.
Yep.
And the moment that we start justifying the purposeful targeting of civilians is the moment that we become terrorists.
Yeah.
So
again,
again,
that's the thing. Yeah.
So like, honestly, you could not have chosen a worse analogy, Lindsay.
Exactly.
You could not have chosen a worse analogy. You know?
Yeah.
Honestly, you want to hear something crazy? You want to hear something absolutely insane? Even Tucker Carlson disagrees with him on this. Tucker Carlson actually believes that it's basically psychotic for anybody to defend the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He's actually made that argument.
Whoa.
This guy is too extreme for Tucker Carlson. All right. I just so ridiculous and dangerous. Like, oh my God. Like
it's D-bag worthy, honestly.
It's D-bag worthy.
Self-defeating. I gotta say, I think it's a great choice this week, Nathan. So congratulations to our favorite Southern Belle, Lindsey Graham, for being this week's D-bag.
So quick correction. I mentioned that there were about 300,000 people that died. I was actually, I was looking at the numbers incorrectly. It was actually between 129,000 and 226,000. But that is still an insane amount. That is still an unthinkable amount.
And now it's time to end our first show back as we usually do. So Nathan, what's your highlight this week?
I feel like our highlights should probably be like highlights for the time we were gone.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah.
God, what all happens to
You're
me
like,
while
I
I was gone?
also don't know. I mean, I feel like just
Yeah,
I don't
what
know.
could it be? What could my highlight be? I'm a
Hmm.
dad.
Yeah,
I'm a
there you go.
dad.
There you
My
go.
highlight is that I am a father, and being a father is absolutely magical.
What a
It is
cliche.
it is tough. It is tough. She is a handful, but God, she is so cute. I love her so much. Um, I I have a very different perspective on life. Um, being a parent. So you know, I totally recommend it.
Hmm.
No, I don't recommend it for the faint of heart, because it is very tough. But yeah, being a father is
Nice.
awesome.
Nice. Well, what the fuck can I say that follows being a father? Well, I guess skiing is great.
I mean, that's nice too, you know.
Yeah, no, it was great. It adds meaning to my life, that's for sure. So, on that, we'll thank some of the amazing people that make this show possible. So, thank you to our amazing patrons Jerry DeViller, Taylor Bloom, Fade Out Scoop, Kyle Chaska, and Tobias Janssen for contributing to make this show possible. And thank you to our incredible editor, Kayla, for all they do to put this show on the air. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to The Perspectrum, and you'll hear from us again